Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we are going to tackle a topic that I think we all have some experience with, whether we know it or not, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We have got a great collection of research articles, actually a whole folder that you sent me, so I think we are ready for a deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to start off, why don't we just, for anyone listening who is not familiar,
Sure.
can you just give us the basic concept of what the Dunning-Kruger effect is?
Yeah, so it's this idea in psychology, and they've done some studies on this that show that people who have low competence in a particular area actually tend to overestimate their abilities.
Oh, okay.
And then on the flip side, people who are very competent in an area tend to underestimate their abilities.
So basically we are all kind of walking around with a skewed sense of
Yeah.
what we're actually good at and what we are not so good at.
Yeah, and it's not just, I'm bad at math, that kind of thing. It's
Right.
that you don't even know that you're bad at it.
Right.
That's the real kicker.
You think you're actually pretty good?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are focusing specifically on source number one for today's deep dive. And this one really digs into what is called the Dunning-Kruger Curve.
Right.
So can you walk us through kind of what that looks like, what the journey is there?
Sure. So they use this analogy of a mountain,
Okay.
which I think is pretty helpful to visualize it. And they say that you start at this place called the peak of Mount Stupid.
Peak of Mount Stupid. I love it.
Yes. So this is when you're first starting to learn something.
Right.
You don't know anything about it, but you feel really confident.
Yeah, you're like, I got this.
Yeah, exactly.
I watched one YouTube video.
Yeah.
I'm basically an expert.
I'm a natural.
Yeah, exactly.
But the problem is you don't even know how much you don't know.
Right.
So that's why it's called the peak of Mount Stupid.
So then how do we get off that peak?
Yeah.
What is the next stage?
So the next stage is you start learning more, you get a little bit more experience,
Okay.
and then you realize, oh, wow, I actually don't know anything. And your confidence completely plummets, and this is called the Valley of Despair.
Okay, the Valley of Despair. So it's
Yeah.
like the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can be a really tough stage.
It's like that, the only true wisdom is in knowing, nothing.
Yeah.
Something like that. But
Yeah, Socrates.
Yeah, yeah.
It's that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I am so far away from where I need to be.
So is there any hope after the Valley of Despair, or do we just stay stuck there forever feeling terrible about ourselves?
There is hope. There is hope.
Okay, Kim.
So the next stage is called the slope of enlightenment.
Okay.
So you're starting to climb out of that valley.
Right.
And as you learn more and you put in more effort,
Yeah.
your confidence starts to gradually increase along with your competence.
Okay, so we are like slowly but surely climbing out of that valley.
Yeah.
And as we are getting more knowledgeable, we're starting to feel a little bit better about ourselves too.
Yeah. Exactly. And you start to connect the dots. You start to understand the nuances of the skill or the topic that you're learning.
And then where does that slope lead us to?
So eventually, if you keep going, you reach the plateau of sustainability.
Okay.
And this is kind of the ideal place to be where your confidence is pretty much in line with your actual competence.
Okay.
So you're aware of your strengths, you're aware of your limitations.
You're not getting cocky, but you're also not
Yeah.
beating yourself up.
Exactly. Yeah, you have a realistic self-assessment.
Okay, so this Dunning-Kruger curve is like this journey from this overconfidence to despair to hopefully eventually
Yeah.
a place of, like you said, sustainable self-awareness.
It's a reminder, I think, that, competence and confidence don't always go hand in hand.
Right. Yeah.
And that learning is a process and, we're all going to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it would be great to hear a little bit more about, the actual research that was done on this. So
Yeah.
in the original Dunning-Kruger study, what did they actually find?
So in their 1999 study,
Oh, yeah?
they tested people on a bunch of different skills like humor, grammar, logical reasoning.
Right?
And what they found was that the people who scored in the bottom 25%, the bottom quartile.
Oh, so the worst.
Yeah, the worst.
Okay.
They consistently overestimated their abilities, like significantly.
So they thought they were like killing it when they were actually,
Yes, they thought they were above average
oh, wow,
when they were actually at the bottom.
that's wild.
Yeah, and it's not just like a little bit off. They estimated their performance to be in the 62nd percentile,
Wow.
when in reality they were in the 12th percentile.
So a 50% difference.
Yeah, huge gap.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. If you don't know what you don't know,
Right.
you don't have the context, the framework
Right.
to even understand how much you were missing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, sometimes just telling someone like you're wrong
Right.
or you need to be more humble, like that doesn't work
Right.
because they can't even process that feedback.
Right. It's like giving directions to someone who doesn't believe in maps. Like you're speaking a different language.
Yeah, they're just completely lost.
Totally.
And so this kind of leads into another concept called the metacognitive deficit,
Okay.
which is this idea that the skills you need to be good at something
Right.
are often the same skills you need to judge your own competence in that area.
Oh, so it's a double whammy.
Yeah, it's like a catch-22.
Yeah, so you need the skills to know that you don't have the skills.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's frustrating.
It is frustrating. Yeah, and so one example of this is like imagine trying to edit a video.
Okay.
If you've never used like professional video editing software before,
Right.
you wouldn't even know where to start. You wouldn't know what the tools do.
Right.
You wouldn't know how to assess if your final product is good or not.
Yeah, so basically you need to have that foundational knowledge
Yes.
in order to even begin to assess
Yes.
how good you are. And without that, you are just totally lost.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why it's really important to develop these metacognitive skills
Okay.
alongside any new skill you're learning.
So how do we do that? How do
Yeah.
we boost our metacognition? Is that something that we can train, or are some people just like naturally better at that?
Yeah, so it's not a fixed trait.
Okay, good.
Like some people might be more naturally self-aware than others.
Right.
But it is something that you can develop, and there are specific techniques that you can practice to get better at thinking about your thinking.
Give me the goods.
Okay, so one technique is called reflective journaling,
Oh.
which is basically where you regularly take time to reflect on your experiences, your
Right.
decisions, your thought processes.
So just writing down kind of like, how did I approach that situation? What worked, what didn't work? Where could my thinking have gone off track?
Exactly. Yeah, it's about bringing your subconscious thought processes
Okay.
into conscious awareness.
So like having a coach, but being your own coach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another technique is self-questioning,
Okay.
which is just asking yourself probing questions about your assumptions,
Okay.
your conclusions, your beliefs.
So not just taking your thoughts for granted,
Yeah.
but being like, but is that actually true?
Yeah, like what if I'm missing something?
Yeah.
What other perspectives could be valid?
Okay.
So by engaging in that kind of internal dialogue,
Right.
you can expose your biases, identify knowledge gaps, and develop more balanced and nuanced perspectives.
So these metacognitive practices are like safeguards against the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes,
Because they're helping you become more aware of your own thinking.
Yeah.
And so you're less likely to fall into those traps of overconfidence.
Right, and they're really important for becoming a better learner,
Okay.
a more critical thinker, and ultimately a more competent individual.
Yeah, it makes sense. But I think the real challenge here is even with these metacognitive tools, like it's still hard to admit when we are wrong or to acknowledge our limitations.
Totally.
Our egos get in the way.
For sure, yeah. And so that's why it's so important to cultivate a growth mindset,
Okay.
which is this understanding that your abilities aren't fixed,
Okay.
but they can be developed through effort and learning.
So basically, we're all works in progress.
Exactly.
We're constantly learning and evolving.
Yep. And a growth mindset encourages you to see challenges as opportunities to grow, to
Right.
seek feedback,
Okay.
to not be so defensive when someone points out your flaws.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much more freeing to think that way, too.
Yeah, it is.
To think like, okay, I am not perfect.
Yeah.
I am going to screw up, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can learn from it.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's feeling less like doom and gloom and more like, okay, this is actually
Yeah.
a path forward.
Right. And that's the goal. Like the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't about shaming people.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing a common human bias and then figuring out, okay, what can we do to overcome this?
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Well, this has been really interesting so far, but I can't help but wonder, even if we manage to like conquer the Dunning-Kruger effect in ourselves, what about all the other people out there who are still, maybe not as aware
Yeah.
of their own
Limitations.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do we navigate a world where so many people seem to be operating at peak Mount Stupid?
Yeah. That's a great question.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one, and it's a question that we will delve into further after a quick break.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we're back, and before the break, we were talking about this kind of tricky situation, right?
Yeah.
Where we might be working on ourselves,
Yeah.
getting better with that self-awareness,
Right.
but everyone around us might still be,
Still stuck.
still stuck at the top of Mount Stupid.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge.
So what do we do about that? How do we navigate a world where there's just so much overconfidence and,
Right.
maybe even incompetence running rampant?
It's a crucial question. And honestly, it's one of those things that there's not like an easy answer to, because the reality is we can't force other people to become more self-aware.
Right.
We can't control how other people perceive their own abilities.
Yeah, it's like we are trying to play this game where we're like, okay, I want to be humble. I want to recognize my limitations.
Right.
But then everyone else is playing by a different set of rules.
Yeah. And so this is where the implications of the Dunning-Kruger effect go beyond just like individual self-perception.
Okay.
And they start to impact group dynamics, organizational behavior, even societal trends.
Okay, so give me an example. Like, how does this play out in the real world?
So think about the spread of misinformation online.
Okay.
People with limited understanding of complex topics often feel very emboldened to share their opinions with absolute certainty.
And they've done zero research. They have read one headline.
Yeah. Or they've watched, a YouTube video and now they're an expert.
Yeah, and they're like arguing with you in the comments like they have a PhD.
Exactly. And it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect on steroids.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just online either, right? I feel like we see this in so many different areas of life.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I'm thinking politics.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like everybody has an opinion.
Right.
Whether they really understand the complexities of the issue or not.
Exactly. Or even like financial investing.
Oh, yeah.
People making decisions based on overconfidence that can have really disastrous consequences.
It's like the stakes get higher.
Yeah.
When it's more than just like an online argument.
Exactly.
Okay, so what do we do? How do we protect ourselves from the Dunning-Kruger effect in others?
So while we can't control other people's behavior,
right,
we can develop strategies to navigate these situations more effectively.
Like, give me the goods. What are the strategies?
So first and foremost, I think it's really important to focus on strengthening your own critical thinking skills.
Okay.
Learning to evaluate information carefully.
So not just blindly accepting things.
Yeah, don't just take things at face value.
Right.
Especially if they're presented with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, because confidence does not equal competence.
Yes, right. So ask questions, demand evidence, be willing to challenge assertions that seem questionable or that lack support.
So basically, we all need to become like little fact checkers.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Have that healthy skepticism.
Yeah, especially now.
Especially now.
With just the sheer volume of information that's coming at us.
Absolutely.
From all directions.
And then when you are engaging in discussions with people who have different viewpoints, try to approach the conversation with curiosity rather than judgment.
That's hard.
It is hard.
Especially when you're talking about something that you feel really passionate about.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's helpful to ask clarifying questions, Try to really understand where they're coming from, look for common ground rather than immediately dismissing their ideas.
It's so easy to just like write someone off if you disagree with them.
Yeah. But it's like you said, approaching the conversation with a more open mind.
Right.
And a more curious mindset might actually lead to something more productive.
Yeah, and you might actually learn something.
You might. Yeah, exactly.
It's not about, just like shutting down the conversation or suppressing different opinions. It's about
trying to have a more constructive dialogue.
Right.
And that's hard, but I think it's really important.
Okay, so we need to strengthen our critical thinking skills.
Yes.
We need to be more discerning about the information we're consuming.
Yes.
And we need to approach disagreements with curiosity and a willingness to understand other points of view.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to remember that just because you recognize the Dunning-Kruger effect in other people, that doesn't make you superior or immune to it yourself.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's a reminder to practice humility, to question your own assumptions, and to stay open to learning and growth.
So it's almost like a double-edged sword. Like, on the one hand, being aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect can help us navigate the world more effectively.
Navigate the world, yeah.
But it also requires us to turn that critical lens inward.
Yeah.
And be really honest with ourselves.
Exactly.
About our own biases and blind spots.
It's a lifelong practice of self-awareness, critical thinking, and intellectual humility.
Well said. I love that. All right, so we're back, and I feel like we've covered so much ground already.
Yeah.
We talked about, what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, how it works.
Yeah.
Why it happens, the research behind it.
The different stages.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And then, of course, how to deal with it on ourselves and in others. But I feel like we could keep unpacking this forever.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There's so much to talk about here.
Absolutely.
So I guess maybe just to wrap things up for today,
Yeah.
what are some of the key takeaways that you hope listeners will walk away with?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just to remember that the Dunning-Kruger effect is a real thing.
Yeah.
It's not just some, abstract psychological concept.
Right.
It affects all of us in different ways.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, I think it's so easy to see it in other people,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
but it's much harder to see it in ourselves.
Right. It's always easier to spot the flaws in others.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really important takeaway, just that self-awareness piece.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would add is that even though this can be a really frustrating phenomenon,
Right.
like it can be frustrating to deal with people who are overconfident.
And incompetent.
Yeah.
It can also be frustrating to realize that you yourself have been
Yeah.
a victim of this effect.
Right.
I think it's important to remember that it's not about shaming people.
Okay.
It's not about putting people down. It's about understanding a common human bias
Right.
and then equipping ourselves with the tools to overcome it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, going back to that growth mindset idea,
Yeah.
it's so important to remember that we are all works in progress and we are all capable of learning and growing.
Absolutely. And I think the more we can embrace that mindset,
Yeah,
the better off we'll be.
I completely agree. All right, well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but hopefully it's given our listeners some food for thought,
Yeah, definitely.
some tools to maybe start examining their own,
Their own biases,
their own thought processes. And,
their own levels of competence.
yeah, exactly. All right, so until next time, everyone, thanks for listening to the deep dive. Remember to keep those minds open and those self-assessments honest
And humble.
and humble.
Yeah.